Well, folks, isn't it funny how a week can fly by, literally in the instant? So back here with having an amazing first part with Ken, let's move on to really why I wanted to reach out to Ken, which is not only has got that amazing story about his health and his discovery of low carb for himself, and as a scientist, an engineering brain figuring it out, he's got his own COVID story. And we'll go into COVID and, as you know, inevitably for his longevity. So welcome back, Ken, and it would be good for you, if you don't mind, to tell us a wee bit about your experience of COVID. That's going to be another exciting story.
Okay, good. Glad to be here. So yes, as you were saying, I'm essentially certain that I had COVID back at the beginning of March, and I think what probably is worth prefacing this with. Since as I said last week, my heart health recovery from 2010 onwards, I actually, for some peculiar reason, did recording every time I had a cold.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't had the flu since the 1990s, I think. And I've had a couple of flus that were just dreadful. I mean, really, never want that again, absolutely flattened by it. And I used to say in the 2000s, I would get a cold every 3-4 months, typically, more in the winter, less in the summer, but a few a year.
Yeah.
But since 2010 and the low carb journey started, I have only had 2 colds between then and 2020 that twice where I thought, right, I definitely have a cold, and I was never off work. I didn't have a single day off work in that period, and that's fine. So when in early March, when I got cold symptoms, I thought, oh, this is interesting. And it was at a time when, at least in the UK, there was some discussion of COVID, of course, but the symptoms were being described as characteristic symptoms were a hacking cough and a persistent cough and so on and so forth. And I thought, oh, well, I've got a cold, which is pretty unusual. Yeah. I wonder if it could be, if it could be this particular SARS-CoV-2 virus. Yeah. But anyway, it was quite a strange experience because it wasn't like any other cold I've had. In that, for the first few days, I thought, I'm not, I'm feeling slightly, like you do when you've got a cold, your head's not feeling right and so on. And I had a mild, although very persistent headache for 48 hours, which was very unusual. I never did anything like that before. And then after 2 or 3 days, it faded away. I coughed about 3 or 4 times, and so I thought, oh well, that wasn't COVID. I mean, it's nothing like this terrible disease that people are, talking about. Then about 5 days later, I started getting very post-flu aches and pains. I tried to do some gardening at the weekend, and literally just the tiny amount of effort involved just exhausted me. Oh. And I felt, no, this is very unusual. I did really aches and pains over muscles, arms, legs, you name it. Wow. And that, it even got to the stage where I felt, do I feel a bit feverish? Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. It's hard to say, but I didn't. I thought, I'm not feeling well again. And I thought, well, maybe it was COVID. Yeah. And this is, this famous second phase of it. Yeah. And anyway, it never got particularly bad, but what happened, basically, I think it was the day after that, my lungs felt very irritated.
Right.
It's hard to describe, but it felt as if I'd inhaled fine dust right down into the depths of my lungs, and maybe even an irritant.
Wow.
And so now I've had asthma, and it didn't feel anything like asthma. Asthma tends to be constriction up near the top of the lungs, and can be pretty horrible. But this was a very similar feeling, but right down at the bottom of the lungs. That's how it felt anyway. And I'm quite active, running and walking a lot, and so on. And what I noticed, there's a set of steps not far away from my house that I use. I was out of breath every time I was going up steps or up a hill.
Yeah.
And now later on, a couple of weeks later, I cursed myself for not. I've got one of these little pulse oximeters that you put on your finger, and it tells you your blood oxygen. And I forgot, and I didn't use it. But essentially, I took my blood pressure, my pulse rate, and so on. And what was happening is I was getting out of breath. My pulse was getting very fast. My blood pressure was shooting away up. And if I rested, it all went back to normal.
Right.
And there were a few times over the next week where my breathing felt, it felt difficult. It felt, it was like asthma, only more, not a short episode, but for longer periods, where actually I thought, no, I'm going to be comfortable just lying on my side, breathing. Yeah. Gently. And I checked with the doctor at that point, and they said, well, it does sound like the sorts of symptoms. And I, got a more confident diagnosis later. But after about a week, so a week into the second phase, so just over 2 weeks from the beginning, it started gradually getting better. And it took 3 months until I was feeling, when I was running, feeling as if I wasn't struggling a bit to breathe, to completely recover. So it was into July before I felt I could run at full strength again. But it wasn't, if you said I could have that again, or I could have the flu, I'd say I'd have that again, please. No way that, it's not a patch of the flu. Wow. So that's what triggered my interest in COVID. And because the first thing I thought was, well, that happened right when my vitamin D levels would be at the minimum, late winter, early spring. So I wasn't surprised to see lots of papers coming out, correlations between the severity of COVID and vitamin D status. Yeah. And that explains the seasonality and so forth. Yeah.
Do you think, what's interesting is, given what the media kind of feeds us, for various reasons, that people with potentially lung challenges might not cope as well as others, and that you had previous lung challenges, like possibly myself, you get this COVID thing. Do you think, whilst it felt like irritant in your lungs and so on, and you got the muscular things, I suppose the obvious question is, do you think you were able to handle it better because by then you were fairly consistently low carb and or oil, not eating the oils?
I think, definitely.
Yeah.
And
I think metabolic health would be fairly reasonable, although your vitamin D would be down because of the time of year.
Yeah. So that's a question we could unpick for a long time. So I'll just mention a few little kind of key ideas there. So I think the first one is that the immune system needs lots of energy to combat a virus, and it gets the energy like everywhere else from mitochondria. And one of the tactics the immune system uses to destroy things is to produce reactive oxygen species from mitochondria. So it's deliberate release of destructive chemicals. Now that's dangerous for your body if you don't have the right defenses. And one of the most important defenses is a chemical called glutathione, which is a powerful antioxidant in the mitochondria. And you make glutathione from, you need selenium, the metal, and you get that in organ meats, liver, kidneys, so on, Brazil nuts, if you like nuts. And you need quite a lot of protein precursors to make the glutathione itself and to process it. And again, you get those in meat, in a good diet. So I think that's one side. That's one very simplified view. If you, let's say you have a reasonable amount of vitamin D, someone has a reasonable amount of vitamin D, but if they eat high carb, then, and if they're getting any insulin resistance or any insulin problems in their body, then the vitamin D levels will be pushed down by that. Right. And the converse would be that if you keep your blood sugar low, keep your insulin low, vitamin D is going to work better than it otherwise would. So there's a whole host of reasons that, are obviously like a magic set of things, like eating good low carb, highly nutritious food with plenty of B vitamins and plenty of good high quality protein protects you in multiple ways against the virus. And then the seed oils, as well as causing havoc with all those other processes that I've just talked about, the most deadly aspect of COVID, especially in the earlier days before doctors were they're a bit better at treating it now, was this ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, I think. Maybe I made that up, but it's something like that.
Sounds right.
It sounds right. I've seen 2 or 3 different explanations. And I'm going to refer back, like I did last week, to Tucker Goodrich in his Yelling Stop blog. It's not the most recent post now, it's a couple from the top, but he wrote this absolutely fantastic analysis of how seed oils are essential for ARDS.
Right.
I mean, so basically, if you don't get ARDS, then the chances of you dying with COVID are slim. Really, I mean, they're slim. There are only 1 in 1,000, roughly, people who get it die. 1 in 700, 1 in 1,000, something in that ballpark. But if you don't get ARDS, then you're not. The chances of you dying fall way down. I'm not saying no one would, but it's the dominant cause of people dying, and you get that, and then it leads into ventilation and organ failure and all of that. And Tucker Goodrich wrote this really thorough explanation of the relationship between seed oils and the omega-6 oils and the processes that go on in the lungs, where the immune system essentially misbehaves and causes damage to your lung tissue and your fluid entering the lungs, and that's when things get really serious. So I think rather than trying to go through, even superficially go through the science here, I think anyone who really is interested in that, I would refer them to the Yelling Stop blog and look for that article.
Yeah. I mean, the vitamin D thing, not being a scientist, but things that I kind of observe, they make sense to me. They probably aren't, but it's like the northern Italians had a dreadful time. They're coming out of the winter into spring. And those northern Italians traditionally don't have a lot of vitamin D. And one would imagine, probably don't, but a lot of pasta, possibly pizzas and processed flours and part of the dynamic. The seed oils probably because they want to be healthy, even though it's the Mediterranean so-called part of the world, Mediterranean diet and so on. And they have a dreadful time. And now you go to where we are now with the whole of Liverpool area into Manchester. Well, my basic geography as a kid in Glasgow was they get a lot of rain too. You've got the central belt of Scotland, and you start to think, well, is the vitamin D thing really a huge issue here? And obviously the quality of the food and maybe poverty and so on and so forth. So, people, I mean, I was so excited to bring you on before I realized you had the COVID experience. But now, but since you have, you clearly must have an interest in it. And using that brain of yours and maybe the sort of circles you move around in, or, I mean, where's your head with it? I mean, what if people are looking at there's that, I mean, I don't have to go into the politics of it, there's no point in doing that.
No.
But the point is that some scientists would say, well, sooner or later, we're all going to get it, kind of thing. And if that's the case, then how do you maximize your ability to deal with it favorably, like possibly you've been able to do?
I don't think there's all that much more to say. I think just the seed oils, it's just another benefit of minimizing the seed oils. And unfortunately, though, you can't do that overnight. It stays around your body for a while. So,
yeah.
So that's not such good news. The thing you can do, and I think it probably does make a significant difference. Now, I've seen a few medics, maybe more alternative medics, but a few medics have claimed that. Well, not so alternative. Like Asim Malhotra, for example, has said very clearly that, if you're going to get COVID in 2 or 3 weeks, the best thing you can do is to cut out your carbs this week, because by the time you get 2 or 3 weeks down the line, your insulin will have dropped dramatically and your immune system will have improved that little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know very much about viral spreading and things like that. And I think it's shocking how little people who are supposed to know about viral spreading seem to know about viral spreading. Yes. But I think a lot of people have a picture, someone sneezes, some droplets get into your airway and you get the disease. But I think that's far from an accurate picture. I'm thinking of a study that was been done in Glasgow hospitals for going back to 2008, I think it was, where they've taken people who were not being treated for respiratory illnesses. They've taken tests to see what respiratory viruses they have. And in the winter, about half the people tested have some respiratory virus or other, but they're not symptomatic typically, right? So I think, and you can also have more than one. You can have rhinovirus, coronavirus, influenza, whatever, all at once.
Yeah. And
I think there's a picture is more of you get exposed and the viruses, maybe huge numbers of them get into your lungs or into your nasal passage and so forth. But your body has defenses designed to keep them out. And one of those defenses, it's a layer that you get on top of all the cells in your lungs and airways called the glycocalyx.
Right.
I love the glycocalyx because nobody writes about it. Nobody seems to acknowledge its existence, but it determines the interaction of pretty much all the cells in your body that are moist but outward facing. So your gut,
Yeah.
your airway, whatever, they all have this layer of sugar molecules on them, and the virus has to fight its way in through that layer before it gets to your cell. So that's one of the defenses.
Right.
And the immune system patrols that layer as well. There's a system of antibodies that patrol that. Again, nobody ever talks about immunoglobulin A. Nobody ever talks about it, but it's very important. And so it's not just the virus comes in and gets you. It's the virus comes in and has to fight through your defenses before it gets you.
Yeah.
And so vitamin D strengthens this layer of immunity. Definitely, no question about that.
No question. Yeah.
No question about that. Another thing that makes a big difference is humidity.
Yes,
because
yeah.
So you have got this layer, but also in your lungs, as everyone's aware, they've also got mucus.
Yeah.
And mucus is actually, does a whole pile of functions, but one of them is actually a decoy for the viruses, because if the virus binds onto the mucus, then it's not binding onto your cells. You cough it up and it's gone.
Yeah.
And so healthy airway, healthy production of mucus and so on is good. And that requires a certain amount of moisture. And so a bad thing that you can do in the winter, especially where outside air is quite cold, and cold air doesn't hold so much water. That's why it rains all the time in Glasgow. But when you bring that air into your house and warm it up, if you've got air conditioning or just heating, then the air gets drier.
Yeah.
And you can find it difficult to keep your airways moist, and that increases susceptibility to viral infections as well. So you don't want to be, going for absolute minimum humidity, I think, as well. Of course, the worst example of that is if you go on a plane, go on a long plane flight, the humidity's, so close to zero. And how many people after they've been on such a flight say, "Oh, I caught a virus on the plane. Of course, they actually caught the virus a while before.
Yes.
But it manifests after the effect of the flight.
It's interesting. I heard the scientists this past 10 days or week or so say that one of the best things we can do, the vitamin D, I think he mentioned zinc, but he mentioned vitamin D, vitamin C possibly. But what he definitely said was, especially if in the winter, if you've got heating on and all the windows closed, boil a kettle in your bedroom before you go to bed and then turn it off. Yeah. Just to get that moisture thing. I mean, so I'm glad you've said that, because these little tips, they all add up, don't they? They all.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a matter of it's not a matter of all or nothing. It's a matter of extent. You can have a little viral infection, or you can have a big viral infection. A little viral infection, a few virus particles make their way in, and your immune system says, "Oh, something's on here," and deals with it.
Yeah.
Whereas a big one, you get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And so you can tip the balance. Obviously, for an individual, you don't know how successful it's going to be, but you can tip the balance.
So are you just eating your way through your immune strengthening, or do you supplement?
So apart from, I do supplement, but for specific reasons. And so I'm going to say this fairly concisely without going into all the details, because it would take far too long. So I think vitamin D and vitamin B12, they're pretty harmless. Yeah. And so if you take a wee bit more than you need, it's not going to cause you any trouble. And so I never find any concern about mentioning those. Okay. The other vitamins, the B vitamins, for example, then there are very good reasons why someone might need to take some of those, but it's not for everyone. Yeah. And so I'm going to leave that aside. Okay. And then the last thing where I think there is a good reason to expect that it might be beneficial are the minerals, in particular magnesium, zinc, and selenium.
Yeah.
And I already mentioned selenium. Selenium is essential for the immune system. I just saw George Henderson posted on Twitter earlier today when someone was pointing out some of the horrible symptoms that people were getting when they experienced COVID, organ problems and so forth. And George Henderson was right off the mark, and he said, yes, they're all symptoms of selenium depletion.
Wow.
And that's true. Again, you need selenium to have good mitochondrial health, and you need good mitochondria to keep all your organs running. Organs are the most energy consuming part of the body, really, unless you're running and exercising. But normally they're the most energy consuming part of the body because they're doing all the biochemistry. And so you need to have healthy mitochondria, and selenium is really important for that.
And you take that, or you just get it from your liver and stuff?
I take a very small amount of selenium every few days, just because there should be enough in meat, because vets will typically make sure that the animals have enough.
Yeah.
But depending, where you're getting things from, it could be slightly lower than you want. So it's a little bit of a judgment. I don't take very much, but I take a little.
Okay.
Maybe it's only actually once or twice a week. 100 micrograms is very little. But you could eat a Brazil nut once a day and you'd be fine. That's about the same level of it. If I'm eating lots of kidneys, which tend to be quite high in selenium, then I don't bother with the supplement. If I'm eating,
so you do eat as well. You're eating kidney, you're eating liver,
heart,
heart as well. Well, okay. I've not got to the heart stage yet. I love liver. I'm okay with liver, and I love kidneys.
Heart's my meal today.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So where do you get that? Do you find it's easy?
Supermarkets? Yeah.
The supermarket's got it.
Yeah. Oh, wow. They often think you're feeding it to your dog, but I've got into butchers and I've said, do you have any lamb's hearts or whatever? And they say, oh, yeah, what sort of dog do you have? So anyway, and so zinc's a very interesting one, because and this, it's hard to make a recommendation, but I think, so I recommended to my parents that they take zinc for this, for viral defense, and there's a lot of evidence that it helps, but it's hard to know whether an individual is zinc deficient or not, because it's not really a good test for it. You can't do a blood test. No. I don't know. Some people do hair tests and so on, and I don't know how trustworthy that is. But there's a lot of people, so Ali, for example, and myself and others who have gone through periods where we think we were zinc deficient. And there's a few clues, like if you've got lots of white spots in your fingernails, that's a hint. Now, the problem is none of these are definitive. So there might be other reasons why you get white spots in your fingernails. But put it this way, I had white spots, always 2 or 3 in my fingernails, and started taking zinc, and the white spots disappeared.
Right.
So I reckon that was a good sign, right? There's also this thing called the zinc taste test, where you make up a solution. You can look it up online. You make up a solution of a particular zinc chemical, and some people, you taste it and then spit it out. Some people taste it, think, oh, it's just water, and other people find it an utterly horrible taste. Right. And the idea is that the people who don't taste it are probably zinc deficient. The people who do taste it, their bodies say, I don't want more zinc. Now, how accurate this is, I don't know. There's a couple of papers on it, but it's really hard. Where
would you get it naturally, zinc? What foodstuffs would give it?
Oysters is the classic. It's ultra high. But again, organ meats. There are some plants that have zinc, but I don't have them in.
So
I
one
don't
would
have them in mind.
imagine, given that most of us aren't eating oysters every day, so
Well, other types of seafood.
seafood generally.
Well, yeah, it's just oysters is the highest. I don't know the
Yeah.
numbers for that,
Yeah.
but I do. So there's a set of problems you can have with zinc and vitamin B6.
Right.
And the problem is that you need zinc to make any use of B6 or even to absorb B6. And you need B6 to make any use of zinc or even to absorb zinc.
Right.
And so there can be a thing where you're, there's a problem here. If you just take zinc, it doesn't work. If you just take B6, it doesn't work. But if you take both, that helps. And I did that for a while. So when I was, talking about the fingernails and the white spots, I also took some vitamin B6 at that time for a wee while. But I find it difficult to talk about supplements because there are there's so many uncertainties and individual requirements, and I don't, in general, think it's a good idea just to take these things. So I wouldn't take a multivitamin or anything like that. And I think you don't want to take these things unless there's a particular reason, but it can be very hard to find out whether you need them or not. So for example, when I said vitamin B6, it comes in two different forms. And one of them is toxic if you take too much. So I certainly wouldn't recommend that people go out and just say, oh, it was mentioned in this, I'll try some. No, I don't think.
Have you turned to alternatives like kinesiology to test your body with these things, or have you stayed away from that, being a scientist?
No, I haven't.
That's okay. So time is absolutely flying by as usual. I mean, one of the having interviewed various people on here, some of the older characters, shall we say, slightly older in their years, seem to be in their interest in their longevity, moving towards or experimenting with carnivore for various reasons. Where's your mind with longevity? I mean, what age are you anyway? Do you mind if I ask?
54.
Yeah. So maybe not as urgent as for someone like me, 65, but longevity does begin to spill in when maybe a few years' time for you. So what are you thinking about that? What's your thinking? You think about your parents, obviously. So what's your thoughts?
So, I mean, for my parents, the best thing they ever did was as soon as they were retired, they spent half the year in Tenerife.
Aye, good for them.
And ate, good food and got plenty of sunlight. And I suspect it's added decades of healthy life.
Was that in the winter months they went there?
Yeah. So until 2010, until I was unwell, I hadn't really thought too much about the combination of ill health and longevity, right? Because longevity is not much good if you're not enjoying it. And so many people these days have Alzheimer's or anything like that, and so my priority definitely is health now. And if that leads to longevity, well, that's fine, but it's to stay healthy as long as possible.
Exactly.
And longevity is absolutely directly connected to mitochondrial health. I mean, it's not the whole story, but it's the biggest part of it, 90%, maybe more. And that's well known in people studying the science of mitochondria, that the whole process of aging, that's where it comes from. And when you're an egg, just a fertilized egg, the first thing that happens is the mitochondria in that egg get distributed around all the cells that have become all the different tissues in your body. And the mitochondria in the egg they've all been through this sifting process that leads to this particular egg, but they're not all equally good.
Right.
And so the mitochondria that end up in your brain might be really good, or they might not be so good. The ones that end up in your skin might be really good or might not be so good.
Yeah.
And as you age, what's happening is that in different tissues in your body, the mitochondria are getting a bit old and tired. And it doesn't happen, some people it happens one part of the body first, other people, everyone ages differently.
Yeah, yeah.
And so really what you want to do is protect the weakest mitochondria in your body. And the best way you can do that is by keeping them under just a little bit of stress. The mitochondria thrive when they're being worked.
Yeah.
And you don't want the mitochondria to be allowed to get weak. Okay. If a cell has very weak mitochondria, then the body will clear out that cell if you push it. Okay. And so that's, if you do exercise or mental exercise, push things a bit, then you will select the strongest mitochondria. They'll still duplicate, but you'll keep the strongest ones and you get rid of the weaker ones.
Right.
And that's there's a huge book written by Thomas Seyfried on the metabolic nature of cancer.
Right.
And basically he has this idea that if you fast for 5 or 10 days once a year or something like that, then you'll flush out all the cells that have damaged mitochondria that might then become cancerous.
Yeah.
So that's, obviously that contributes to both health and longevity. And then I think the other side of the coin is that as well as getting rid of the weaker mitochondria, you want to strengthen the mitochondria you've got. And that goes back to having a good high protein. Well, I should be careful about that. I don't mean particularly high protein diet, but I mean a diet that's high in good quality protein.
Yes.
So it doesn't need to be a vast amount of protein, but the protein that you eat should be good quality. And it doesn't need to be meat. It can be a careful mixture of plant foods. You can still get high quality protein, but you just can't get it from one plant. You have to use a mixture of them. Whereas if you have meat and organ meat and so forth, then you tend to get the right mixture fairly naturally. So I think that's essentially it. Strengthen your mitochondria and keep things turning over with exercise, including mental exercise. And that's probably the best way to prolong good health.
Do you take a view on any particular exercise, or are you just a generalist?
I like running, but I don't think so. I typically run in the range 10 to 20 kilometers. I like running for more than an hour, because it's a bit like you said last time about the brain fog.
Yes.
And the mental clarity.
Yeah.
I find one of the peaks of mental clarity is after I've been running for an hour.
Yeah.
And I think I don't think it's endorphins. I think it's because the glycogen has been cleared out and the ketones soar.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that happens is, imagine you were hunting.
Yeah.
And you've been hunting for an hour and you haven't caught anything. Well, you could either be a carb-fed hunter, in which case you'd just be about to bonk.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. Or you could be a keto hunter, in which case your brain is getting sharper and sharper all the time.
Yeah.
Your hunting skills will improve. So I reckon that's what it is. But anyway, I think I like to run for that. I don't think running is particularly good exercise for this kind of thing. I think you just want to do a little bit of kind of resistance or weight type exercise. And I don't, you know, very little, very gentle and little, you know, just something that's enough to get your blood flowing and, you know, get your muscles working, to avoid the lack of so all the tissues in the body have got, or most of the tissues in the body have got functions that are not obvious, as well as the functions that are obvious, right? So if your muscles get weak, it's not just that you can't move very well, because the muscles have a job in your body. They absorb glucose. They help keep your blood glucose constant. Adipose, fat tissue, doesn't just sit there and store energy. It absorbs a lot of waste products, a lot of oxidized linoleic acid, for example. It ends up in your fat tissue because it's a way of cleaning it out of the body, out of the circulation.
Excellent.
And so it's you want to, you know, you want to exercise your body, not exercise your muscles. You want to exercise everything, right? You want to do some exercise that you know, gets your heart rate up a wee bit. But it doesn't need to be, you know, violent aerobic exercise, but you want to be moving or lifting some weights or something like that, just to exercise the muscles.
And the other big thing that we hear a lot about now is the microbiome. Is there anything you're particularly doing for your gut health?
I don't seem to need to, which, this is a very complicated topic. And you know, it's one of the topics that really scares me by its complexity. I mean, to try and really get up on the microbiome, you could be reading for years, if it's even possible. I'm a bit skeptical about. So I don't eat much fiber, and I'm better without it.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Same here.
You see lots of papers where people try a different diet and they show that the variety of the microbiome changes and so on. I'm not sure that's really meaningful, because your microbiome will adapt to whatever you're eating. And it's reversible. It'll go back. So I don't think. So
you don't worry about it.
I don't worry about it. Oh, I think it is very important.
Yes.
And I think the relationship between, you know, microbiome, good gut health, keeping all the toxins in your gut out of your bloodstream and different out of your brain, is critical. And so I think if there are people who have got any gut related health problems, then, you know, focusing on the microbiome should be a priority. It just isn't for me as it happens.
I mean, one of the things, again, I keep hearing or reading on my journey with this is that the people who have gone towards carnivore, the people who are pure carnivore, very often they're asked about, well, you're not eating all that fiber, therefore, you know, do you have trouble pooping, to use an American word? Not particularly popular in Glasgow, that word. But the point is, of course, that they seem to be extraordinarily healthy when they move themselves every day or every other day or whatever happens with them, but they don't have any issue with the lack of fiber. Do you think you're more inclined to carnivore like a lot of the guys, or are you quite? Would you go vegetarian or vegan?
No. No. So at the moment, I probably get 95 to 99% of my calories from meat. So if you and eggs, some eggs, but meat and eggs. So I do eat some fish, but not as much as I used to, actually. But I do eat the the smash fish, salmon, mackerel,
Yeah.
anchovy, whatever the other letters are, fish, the sort of oily fish, but not in vast quantities.
No.
Sardine now and again, or mackerel now and again, that sort of thing. But I do actually more and more I find myself eating organ meat. And actually that was in the period recovering from COVID. I developed this enormous hunger for liver.
Yes, I would imagine that would be the case.
And, I was eating liver every day, not a huge amount, but I was eating liver every day, to the point where I actually had to think, am I getting too much vitamin A from this? But I worked it out, and it should have been okay. And it was interesting because after about a month, that just tapered off.
Yeah.
And I now have liver once a fortnight, or, once a week at most.
Yeah.
And that was quite interesting. It was only in reflection, thinking every time I went to a shop, I was buying more liver, and eating it pretty much every day.
Yeah.
And I think that must have been some feedback going on there, some biofeedback telling me to buy liver and eat it.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming, given your accent, that you're still in the central belt somewhere in Scotland. You know, like me, I ran away to get to the sunshine. But is there a particular? I mean, there's a lot of Glaswegians or West of Scotland people on this or watching this. A lot of central belt to Edinburgh and so on. Is there a particular butcher you frequent? Because in the sense that you go there and they're happy to sell you hearts and stuff. Is there any? Would you recommend a butcher or two in the West End or somewhere else?
Not really.
That's where you live. But the point is there a butcher?
Yeah. No, lamb's hearts can be a bit hard to get, but I really get most from just a butcher or supermarket.
Do you?
Yeah.
And do you actually go up to the butcher counter in a supermarket and ask for?
It varies.
Does
it varies. Yeah.
Down here, I don't think I've ever. Even liver's not easy to get down here on the supermarket shelf. You can get it occasionally at the counter. I've never seen hearts.
It varies geographically, and I think there's a few supermarkets where they know their local market, and so they actually stock accordingly.
Yeah.
So I haven't been to it so often recently, but there's a supermarket in the heart of Partick, and they tend to be very well stocked with organ meats.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, and it might be because there's it's quite
an ethnic group down there, maybe that
it's an international community actually there. That so I think it's it's a peak of Gaelic speaking as well, but also Polish and Asian, and I mean it's a very mixed community, and I think that the well, I know from speaking to people in the supermarket that they have some discretion as to what they stock.
Yeah.
And the same supermarket, a different branch of it that's only a couple of miles away, has nothing like the same selection. So there might be some level where if enough people ask, they might be able to buy it in. And I
can get liver and stuff and kidneys from farm shops, that's what I go, but you don't, the supermarket's not got it,
No.
Very rarely. Anything, we're getting close to the end again. Is there anything that's currently driving your passions that might be useful for the visitor? Is there anything that you're reading or watching, or that might rub off on the rest of us?
Well, the topic that's kind of fascinated me, and I realized that I knew really nothing about, or I had this impression I'd probably got when I was in school, and hadn't revised it, is on the topic of Paleolithic history,
right,
and early human development, and I think there might be things to learn for nutrition there as the evidence improves. I said last week that I'm not convinced of much of that evidence at the moment, and that's because the basic archaeology or understanding, I think, is so poor
Yeah.
But there have been, you know, major strides made in understanding how humans have been living back even beyond 100,000 years,
Yeah.
which is all new. And so there might be some clues to be had there. So far, I haven't, you know, there's nothing too much, but that's I would say it's something I've become quite interested in the last few months.
Cool.
So,
And given that a mutual friend now would be Ali, have you tasted Scoundrel? Would you recommend it to though?
so one of the first things that I lost when I went low carb was my sweet tooth.
All right.
So Ali gave me a sample of Scoundrel very early on. I mean, before it was available.
Yeah. Wow.
And it tasted pretty sweet to me. But I mean, it was a pre-release. It's like when when people send things for review and say, we don't have the final firmware yet, so it wasn't the final recipe, but it was very good. I mean, there's no. I mean, it was very. It was very good to know that this was a low carb. I mean, it's sugar-free product and full of heavy cream and so on. It was probably too sweet for me to properly enjoy.
Okay.
Because I got so used to not having sweet things, and I watched your interview with Ali, and I was I remember him saying in particular that it was selling well with the kids.
Yes.
The kids couldn't tell the difference. I think that's what he said. Yeah. So, you know, I think that's probably the ultimate test for something that ice cream is.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I mean, a couple of other daft questions. Do you have a coffee with cream or anything like that? Do you indulge with that?
I have coffee, and I almost never have it with cream. There's a few people who are very close to being carnivores.
Yes.
But they're still going to keep their coffee.
Yes. And what about, do you take some of the lower carb alcohol? Do you drink alcohol at all?
I've been known to drink the odd Scotch whiskey, which is pretty low carb. Yeah. I occasionally have some wine, actually, not so much the last couple of years, but the type of wine that I would like anyway are the more, you know, low carb ones anyway. So Shiraz and so forth. And I find the amount of beer that I drink has declined to almost nothing.
Yeah, I'm saying.
I probably have about twice a year or something like that, and that's about it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. But no, you're no longer presumably a pie supper out of the local chippy.
No.
I'm
afraid not. There's lots of things that are out the question. The funny thing is, I don't
need them.
No, when you mention things like that, I think, oh right, yeah, no, that's true. I don't, but it doesn't. I find it's very strange, and I think quite a lot of people, maybe who are even more completely carnivore than I am, find that the food, you know, it remains good. You can eat the same thing several times a week or so on and enjoy it every time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's us on the hour again. So, my God, just flew by. 2 hours just going. You know, unbelievable. I'm really, really, really grateful for you giving us your time, Ken. And it's good.
Pleasure.
It's good. Often, you know, there's Americans and, you know, Canadians and all sorts of people, but that's two Glaswegian type sounding accents I've had, which is really quite encouraging. So there you go. It's not just the foreigners, we're into it as well, which is great.
It's good to hear that your accent is completely preserved. So that's great.
Yes, I don't think I'll ever lose it. So, well, I wish you all the best with all the work you're doing, and these pulses coming from outer space are making sense to you if they don't make sense to anybody else. That's fantastic. Yeah, good stuff.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
Ken, thanks again. Maybe we'll get you on again sometime in the future when things develop a bit further, eh?
Sure, why not? Why
Right.
not? Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.